Thank you all for joining. And let me just move this here out of the window, out of the way a little bit. And so what we're going to do today, I scheduled this for an hour and a half. I'm not sure if it'll take that long, but what we wanted to go through was we'll do a little demo. So when we sent out the email a couple of weeks ago, we'd asked you to fill out a survey. And so the idea of doing that is that we could kind of get a sense for what people wanted to talk about, what we wanted to show, and a few things like that. So there were a lot of questions just about general workflow and how to use the application, how to install it. That's where a lot of the questions were. So what we thought we'd do is we'd start with an overall demo. That'll probably be about 20 minutes to 30 minutes for the demonstration of how to install the application. I'll go through a couple of workflows of how that works. And so during that time, if you have questions, again, you can use the chat window to post questions. And we'll hold those back for a little while during breaks, during the demonstration, or after. We'll respond to those questions. If they're simple questions, we'll probably have one of the team members respond in the chat window as well. So we'll try to keep the information flowing. So after that, what we can do is I have some of the questions. I kind of consolidated the questions that came out of the survey. So I'll answer some of those questions, but we'll also start to answer some of the questions that come in through the chat window. So we'll spend some time doing that. And then we'll wrap up. We'll do a little bit of conclusion. There were a number of questions that talked about or asked about what was coming in the next release, roadmaps, new features. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then how to access additional information, training, group chats, things of that nature, and how to reach out to the team and get more information. So we'll conclude with that. So that's the rough agenda that we've got planned. So I think I sent an email a couple days ago just kind of reminding everyone about the webcast. And so like I said, we took the information that you guys filled out in the survey. And again, about 35% of the questions had to do with just the general overview of the application, about training and things like that. So that's why we'll start with a general overview. There were a number of questions about data, accessing different types of layers, different types of maps, different types of themes of data. So we'll go through some of that also in the demonstrations. There were questions about install and performance and the user experience of the application, how to change the styles and the layers, and even some questions about 3D. And then about how this application, this extension inside of Illustrator and Photoshop relates to other products that Esri, the ArcGIS platform, has. And then there were just a series of miscellaneous questions as well. So I'll try to address most of those as we go through the webcast this morning. So with the demo, what I'm going to do quickly is I'll show how you install the application, where you get it from, how to draw a map extent, show you different ways of adding data, and then bringing those map layers into Illustrator. I'm going to focus primarily on Illustrator today. So if you guys are on the webcast or have already installed it and have a general understanding of the workflow, hopefully there'll be little tips and tricks that you'll pick up as I go through this, but some of this may be information that you already have, so I apologize for that, but we want to go through kind of an end-to-end workflow, so I'll start with that. So the first thing I want to start with is I'm actually going to go to the Adobe Exchange. So the Adobe Exchange is the kind of Adobe's marketplace, if you would, for third-party extensions. So Adobe actually creates their own extensions and puts in here, and vendors like ourselves, Esri, have put ours in here as well. So how you access the application is you can go down to adobeexchange.com. You can click Creative Cloud, and this is their marketplace. You can see it here. And you can filter by application, by product, and so on and so forth. So for example, if you want to do a quick search, you could just type ArcGIS, which is the name of the Esri technology. And here you can find our extension. So if you click on this, what you do is over here, you would sign in with your Creative Cloud login. And once you're logged in, you can then install this application. And you can see here this big free button. If you click on that free button, it will install the application. And when it's installed, depending on your internet speed, it will show up in Illustrator and Photoshop under Windows and Extensions. So you can see it here. So I just wanted, at this point, I just wanted to give a note here. We have received a number of calls regarding if you're using it seems to be an enterprise, an Adobe Enterprise or Team account. It seems like the extension actually doesn't show up here. If you do run into that issue, there'll be an email at the end of this presentation. You can reach out to us and we'll help troubleshoot what those issues are. It doesn't seem to be related to if you have an Adobe personal account that seems to install pretty successfully from the Adobe Exchange. But again, if you go through those steps, you click the install from the Adobe Exchange, and then you go into Windows Extensions and you don't see it, just drop the team an email and we'll help troubleshoot what's going on there. The other thing I wanted to note is I'm using a PC for this demonstration. It works on Mac and PC. I just happened to choose my PC for this demonstration today. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back. I'm going to open the extension. And when it starts, you'll have a window here that we call our map board window. So ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud. And the first thing you can do is you can start. So you can click here or you can click here to sign in. So what I'm going to focus today on is using our complimentary access. So this is completely free. It's not a timed out license. You can use it indefinitely as long as you'd like. We also have a second way to log in, which is if you're an ArcGIS Esri customer, you can sign in using those credentials. But for this demonstration today, I'm going to focus on the complimentary or the free access. So I'm going to click this, I'm going to click go. And what you need to do to sign up for the free access is provide a name, an email address. You can, and then agree, and then click sign up. So I'm on our internal network, but what you notice is when I click sign up, I get an activation code. So when you sign up and do this, what you will do is you will get an email from us, from Esri, back to this email account, and inside of that email, you'll get an activation code that you will put in here. So let me show you that email. So this is just a image, but what you'll do is you'll get a email from us, Esri. It says authorization codes for maps for Adobe Creative Cloud. And then you'll see this activation code here. I have it highlighted in the image here. So what you would do is you'd copy this activation code out of the email that gets sent to you. And then what you would do is you would paste it in here, like what you see here. And then what you do is you click activate. So again, sometimes depending on your email server, and again, because we're sending an email, sometimes it may go to your junk folder in your email. Give it a few minutes and check your junk folder to make sure that it's being received. Again, if you run into issues, just drop us an email, and again, there'll be an email at the end of the presentation if you have any issues with that. So once you activate your application, you're in. You can see here now I have an account. I'm already logged in. I have my buttons are enabled. So the first thing I want to do is kind of show you how to draw a map extent. So for example, I can pan and zoom just like you would in any kind of mapping workflow here. What I'm also going to do here is I can also search. So let's say I want to make a map over New York. I can do that. It'll zoom me into New York. And what I can do here is I have really two ways of defining a map extent. So that's the first thing you need to do is define where you want to make your map of. So I'm going to start over here with the draw button. So you can see it here. So this allows you to interactively create a map extent. So I'm going to click this button, and you can think of it almost like a crop tool. So I'm just going to draw a box over it, and so then I get to name my map. So I'm going to name my map New York. And then what you can do is define the size of your artboard. So what you're doing here is you're defining a map extent, a geographic extent over a certain location, But what we're going to do is we're going to create a document for you, and you can decide the size of that document using the presets that come from Illustrator or Photoshop. So you can see it here. These are the standard presets that you have on your machine. So for example, if I want to do, maybe this map is for print or for web, I can pick some of the standard formats for that. So I'm just going to pick letter here, for example. You'll also note that the units here, excuse me, width and height are coming back in printer points. So what it also uses is your default units. So whatever your preferences are for units inside of Illustrator or Photoshop, those are the units that are used here as well. You can type in new units like you can in Illustrator. You can type in IN for inches or CM for centimeters, and it will auto-calculate that as well. So what I can also do is flip whether this page is portrait or landscape by clicking this button over here. So you'll notice that the width and the height, when I click this, they'll reverse. So I can do that. And so then what I can simply do is say OK. So now what I've got is I've got a box, a map extent, what we call a map board over New York. And what you can see here is here up the top, here's the name of our map, New York. And if I had more than one map extent, I would see them here in this drop down. I'll show you that in a minute. You'll see the width, the W here. This is the width of your document. This is going to be the height of your document, and this is scale, or the map level of detail. And so you can go back in and you can delete that map extent. You can also go back and re-edit those parameters if you choose to do that. So for example, down here, we have the same number of buttons here. If I want to go back in and change the document size, I can do that by clicking this button. And again, I can call my map something else. I can change these parameters. I can do all those types of things. So I can always go back and modify those properties. So the other thing to note here is in the map board window, this is not a preview. This is just where you define your Illustrator document size or your Photoshop document size and your map extent. So if you actually want to see what the map is going to look like, there's a second window for that. So you can access the what we call the compilation window by clicking this little button here. It says preview and add content. It's the same button that's over here as well. So those access the same information. So I'm just going to click on this one. It will open up a second dialog. And what I like to do, so we call this our compilation window. What I normally like to do here for the webcast, I won't be able to do it because I don't have as much screen space, but I like to have these windows kind of spread side by side, kind of like what I have here. And what you can do here is these dialogues are linked together. So for example, if I'm over here in the map board dialog and I change the extent, for example, if I pan and zoom, you'll notice that the compilation window or the preview window is actually updating based on that extent. So again, any changes that you make here, it will be previewed over in this window over here in your compilation window. So that's how those two windows work together. So again, this is a preview. The compilation window is a preview of what the map will be before you download it into Illustrator. And then the map board dialog is the window that defines your document size and your map settings themselves. So the first way I showed you to create a map extent was interactively using this draw tool. So what I'm going to do now is going to turn off the draw mode. And so you'll notice now I can navigate here again. I'm not changing the map extent. But what I can also do is create map extents by importing data or layers from other places. So I can also click the import button, which is what I'm going to do here. And I'll start at the bottom. We have the import from file. So there are a couple of file formats that we can bring in. And in this example here, I'm going to bring in a comma delimited document, a CSV file. And this CSV file, I'll show you the inside of what this looks like. But for example, here I have points of interest over Redlands, which happens to be where Esri's headquarters are. I'm going to open that file. And what you'll notice is two things. One is it automatically zoomed and created a map extent over the area based on the data that was in that file. It named the map. You can see it here, Redlands points of interest. And you'll also notice over in the compilation window, you'll see the preview of the map, and you'll also see the data here as well, right? So you can see all the points that were in that CSV file already loaded in your map document. So the third way that you can do this is you can actually import from a layer. So you can bring in files that you have locally on your machine, like CSV files, KML, KMZ, and shape files, and I'll show you that in a minute. But Esri ArcGIS also has a lot of data hosted in our cloud that you can consume as well. So another way of creating a map extent is loading from a layer, which is what I'm going to do this time around. I'm going to click Load from Layer. And what you'll notice here is we have a browse for an ArcGIS location. So we have some sample maps and layers here that you can browse from. You also have something called the Living Atlas. So this is kind of a curated subset of content that we host in our ArcGIS Cloud. And then you have ArcGIS Online, which is the kind of the whole Esri platform of cloud data. So in this data sets, in this cloud that we have for ArcGIS, there's data that Esri creates and provides. There's business partners. They put data up in this cloud of data. And we have users. So think of it a little bit like the internet, right? So the data is there. You can access it. There's some data that is free to use, and then there's some that actually require higher permission. So here's an example here. This little key icon, that means that as a free user, as a complimentary user, you don't have access to that. But there's lots of other free data here, for example, zip codes, US parks, time zones, that you have access to. So what I'm going to do in this particular example, I'm going to bring in world countries generalized. So this one right here. So what I can do is I can click on this thumbnail here. There's a brief description about this layer, this map. And if I want to see more information about it, down here in this sub panel, I can click the full description. So when I do that, it opens up a browser and there's more information about this layer. So for example, this one here is actually created by Esri, by us. And it has some information about it. It tells you kind of description. And so you can see a little bit of more information about that. So every map or layer that you want to bring in from either of these locations has that ability to get that information. So what I can do at this point is if it's the layer I want to start with, I click the Add button here. And again, did the same thing, right? It created a map extent, it named it, and it added the layer in the compilation window, so you can see it over there as well. So again, just like before, just like when I was interactively drawing the map extent, what I can also do is modify this. So now I want to go back in, and you'll see that it's a little bit bigger than I want. It's kind of going past the edge of the world here. So what I want to do is I'm going to modify the map properties. And instead of being restricted to a particular artboard or document size, I'm going to set the scale. And what that's going to allow me to do is actually grab these handles here and I can bring them in. And so when I do that, you'll notice that the width and the height are changing. You can see that happening here in the document. And again, you can see the compilation window changing as well. So again, I mentioned that along here, you can get this information. You get the width, the height, the scale, and we have this drop down. Now that we have more than 3 maps or more than 1 map, I can actually show you by clicking here how you can go between those maps. And they update. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go back to the New York map, and I'm just going to delete that. So you can delete that by clicking the delete down here or the trash can up here. It's the same thing. So I'm going to delete this map. I don't want that one for now. I'm going to go back to my world countries map, and I'm going to minimize my map board dialog and make the compilation window a little bit bigger at this point. So I'm happy with the extent I've got. You can see that layer that I've added here. What I want to show now is, in addition to just this, you can actually go in here in the ellipse next to the layer. I can change the style of my map. So I can go down to here and just say change style. And I can choose to symbolize my countries differently. So I can choose an attribute from this layer. And I'm just going to pick name, country name. You'll notice now that every country gets a different color. And I can go in and even customize this a little bit further if I choose to do that by clicking here. Let me make this a little bit larger. So you can see all the countries listed here. They all have a unique color. There's a few additional ones here at the bottom that didn't get symbolized. I'm going to add that as well. So now everything gets a unique color. I can change the transparency here. I can do some other things. But again, just a really quick way of actually getting a map that shows every country with a unique color. And again, this is just bringing in one of these layers that's hosted in the ArcGIS cloud of data. So now what I'm going to do is, if this is a really simple map, what I can now do is simply click synchronize or download. So you can do that here. This is what we call the action bar. You can access it here, or on the far right, it's the little cloud button with the down arrow. So what this will do is the map that you see here in my compilation window, this is the map that actually will get downloaded into my Illustrator document. So there's a little message here, and I'll tell you what this message means here in a second as we're downloading. So when I click this, what this message is saying is, when I download this map, what we're actually going to get is the artwork from here. Now, if you were to close Illustrator and reopen the document, the artwork that you downloaded is saved as part of the document. But the map that was available in the compilation window, what you see here with the individual layers, is gone. And so again, that's something with the complementary access, you really only get to keep the compiled map available while Illustrator is open. Now, once you download, obviously the artwork sticks around as part of the document. So that was pretty quick. It says here, successfully downloaded the map into artwork layers, design away. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to minimize this dialog. Here's Illustrator. I'm going to open up the layer panel and just kind of zoom in here a little bit. So what you can see over here, let me expand the layers panel here. You can see all the countries here. There's a series of vector layers. If I expand it, all the countries are broken down. So here's Canada, for example. It's on its own sublayer. You can go in and change all these as well. Obviously, you can delete things, make modifications. This is all vector artwork here. The other thing that was downloaded is what we call a base map. So you can see it here. Now in this example here, and I'll show another example a little bit later on where the background map or the base map, this happens to be just a image, so a raster file. So you can get rid of that or keep it. But there's also a number of vector base maps that I'll show you here in a minute as well. So I mentioned that the artwork will always live, but the compiled map will go away with complementary access. So what I'm going to do here is, here you can still see the source map, the compiled map. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save this document. I'm going to close it. I'm going to close Illustrator. Waiting for Illustrator to close. Sure. So we'll take a couple questions.
Okay, so there was a question about the complementary access already activated and the radio button being grayed out. Can you explain that?
Sure. Yeah. So let me just finish what's going on here with Illustrator. So there was a question with, I already have complementary access and its button's already grayed out. What does that mean? And I can show you here once I open this up again here. Let me just. So once you sign up with complementary access, you always have access to it. You never have to sign up again. And so I know that's a fairly common question. So let me open up Illustrator and I'll show you actually how that works. So once you sign up, the reason the complementary radio button is disabled is because you've already accessed it and you've already enabled it. And there's no need to re-enable or access a new activation code for that. So that was kind of the reason for that. So let me just show you how that works here. So again, in my example, let me go back over here. And again, So if I go into account, so I've already signed in, so this is probably what you're seeing here, is you'll see this. Why is complementary access disabled? I think this is the question. It says activated, and that's the reason. Again, what you'll notice here is I don't need to sign in again. All my buttons are enabled. I can do that. I can access my map. So let me go back and show that file, which I think was this one. So if I open up this document here, you'll see the map comes back. All my artwork is here, but you'll notice that the source map has gone away. So you really get one opportunity, one session to do that. Now, again, if that was of interest and that's a feature that you want, that's only available with the ArcGIS login account. So not available with the complimentary account. All right. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go back in and I'll show a little bit more of adding data inside of the compilation window. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to re-import that CSV file. So let me open up that file.
I have a few questions about the CSV file.
Okay.
What are the columns?
Yes.
And, what supported columns? Or,
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do. So let me show you how that works. I've imported the CSV file, and I'll show you what's inside that CSV file as well. Just making this dialog a little bit bigger so you can see it. So here is the CSV file. I'm going to open it up and show you what's inside. So there's a number of columns inside of that. You have the geographic position, the lat long. So there's a number of ways that you can determine position inside of or from a CSV file, and I'll show you different options for that. Then there are a number of other fields. So, and I'll show you these in a second. There's a name field, there's a symbol field, and one of the more interesting ones is the category field. So what I want to show real quickly is I'll show you the name field and the category field. So here is that file. Again, if I go into the ellipse and I say change style, I can choose an attribute. So the attributes are equivalent to the field headers in those columns. So you see the category, you see the lat long fields, you see the name, right? Those are the ones I highlighted. You see symbol. So the values that are available here are the same ones as these here. So we have name and category. So for example, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to symbolize based on category. So again, you can see the values here, school, fire station, park, all that is coming from, again, this category field here in the Excel document, sorry, the CSV document. So I'm just going to say okay here. The other thing I'm going to do is go back to the ellipse and I'm going to add some labels to this map. So if I click on manage labels, again, you can see the name, you can see again the same fields coming from the CSV file here, and I'm just happening to pick name. You can change the point size and the position and something like that. So really quickly. So what I also wanted to show was in this particular example of the CSV file, it's using a latitude and longitude, a number to describe the location. That's not the only way that you can define a location. So I'm going to go to our help document, and I'll share this link again after. So here's documents. And for example, if I type in CSV file, it kind of goes through this process of what I've just described, the different ways that you can add data, the different information types. If you scroll down here a little bit, there's information specifically about CSV and text files. So you can see some of the other files as well. But I click here. So you'll notice here are the different ways that your CSV file can define location. So in the example that I was showing, it had lat and long, right? So lat and long described as a number, but you can also define it based on an address, a city, a state, a zip code. So there are a number of ways that the CSV file could be configured to define a location. So if you put in the city name, call your column city, add a state or a zip or an address, it can figure out and where to plot those points on your map, all from the same CSV file. So one thing to note here, obviously this is not the most well-designed map, let's say. It's pretty busy, it's not very appealing. So one of the key kind of takeaways here is you just really need to categorize and set up the information for your map. All the design and all the aesthetic work will happen in Illustrator after the fact. So really, I just need to have the labels. So again, you know, I'm not picking a font, I'm just picking really where they get positioned, the size, because I'm gonna make those modifications to the font and the location potentially after the map has been downloaded into Illustrator. And again, the same is true for the categories, right? So they all have these kind of really generic looking symbols here, these dots. Again, maybe not the most appealing, doesn't tell the kind of the design story that you want to tell, but the point is just putting things in the right layers so that they show up appropriately in Illustrator so you can easily find them and modify them after the fact. So that's kind of really the workflow, is just getting the data in, categorizing it, putting it in groups of sublayers that you can then easily modify in Illustrator after the fact. So we talked a little bit earlier about base map. So again, here you can see the layer here, Redlands points of interest. So again, that came from the CSV file. And then we have this base map. And again, if you click on the ellipse, there's a number of base maps that you can choose. So this particular one is our topographic. And you can see here from this list, up in the right-hand corner, there's a little icon that looks like a little pixel grid. So all the base maps that have the little pixel grid, the oceans, the terrain, the National Geographic, the light canvas, so on and so forth, they all have this pixel grid. And really what that means is this map, this base map is actually just an image layer. It's just a raster. So you can't modify the individual components once you don't download that into Illustrator. You'll notice that there are two vector maps up here. And you can tell they're vector maps because they have a little kind of vector-y symbol, for lack of a better word here. We have natural earth, which is better for maps that are kind of zoomed out. So, you know, maybe state or country level detail. The other one that I think is most useful 95% of the time, if you want a vector base map, is this one called Vector Street. So this is a really detailed worldwide map that provides vector content. So you can, like I said, about 95% of the time, this is probably the map you want to use, is this Vector Street map. And again, that's all vector artwork. So the other thing I wanted to show was a couple other different ways of adding data as well now. So you've seen us add a CSV file. You've seen me add in layers from ArcGIS Online, Esri's cloud of data. I want to go through and show a couple other different ways of adding data specifically inside of the compilation window. So you do that by clicking the second button here. It's the one that has like the little layers and the little plus icon. And again, similar to what you saw in the map board dialog, you have ways of adding layers and files and maps. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a layer, again, from ArcGIS. And I'm going to just pick ArcGIS Online. And what I want to add is I'm going to search for a hillshade. So this is where you can actually see the shape of the mountains, right? Let me just type it in correctly. And I can do a search. And the other thing you can do is you can click over here. You can say most viewed, most recent, highest rated, owner, title. So you can click these little arrows to actually sort how the items get returned. You can also filter based on whether the information is image data or vector information. So hillshade is typically raster. So for example, I can do this and it'll filter out again. So you can see here now what's getting returned from ArcGIS Online is the information I'm looking for here. And again, if you need to get additional information about this, down in the description, again, the same as before, Scroll down here, you can click the full description. And again, this is a layer, and this particular example is provided by us, again, in ArcGIS Online, in Esri's cloud of data. Again, it could be information provided by us, business partners, or users. So one thing to note here about the information is, because this is our cloud and customers and users can contribute data as well, it's a little bit like searching the internet, right? You're looking for a source of information. So there's, it's useful to be able to kind of understand and who's providing that data and make sure that's appropriate for use. And that's why, for example, this living atlas of the world is available. So again, I had mentioned before, that's kind of a subset of ArcGIS Online that's been kind of curated. So again, that still could be data coming from customers, but it's been reviewed and vetted a little more by Esri staff and has a higher quality of information. So in this case here, this is the layer I want. I'm going to add that to my map as well. So you can see that layer has come in. One thing to note with image layers, you'll notice that it always sits on top. And so, for example, here, even though the order is not necessarily what you want right now, again, what you can do is modify the layer order in Illustrator after it gets downloaded. So here's the hillshade, and here's the map below it. So that's another way of adding data. The other thing you can do is, in addition to downloading data from our cloud of data, you can find lots of great map data online. So I'm going to use an example here. I'm going to go to, again, the city of Redlands. So again, this is the town that our head office is located in. And a lot of cities, towns, local government, federal, state provide map data for free. So this happens to be the city of Redlands source for accessing map data. And for example, you can see here, there's a number of layers that I can download. So what I want to add here is my school boundaries. So I can click in here and say, explore this. And every vendor, every city, every local government, will have a kind of a different application or different look and feel, but I just want to show you as a sample of how you can find this data. So in this example here, the way it sits, it is presented is they have a download button over here, and you can see that the city of Redlands in particular were allowed to download 3 or 4 different types of formats to access this data. You can access it as a spreadsheet, which I believe is a CSV file, which I showed you before. You can access a KML or a KMZ document. KML is the Google Map format. You can download a shapefile, or you can download a file geodatabase. So with ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud, we support spreadsheets, CSV files, KML, and shapefiles. We don't support file geodatabase. So in this particular example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the school boundaries as a shapefile. And so a shapefile actually comes as a zipped document. So you can see that it downloaded. And what I'm going to do now is, now that it's downloaded as a zip file, I'm going to add that to this map as well. So again, in the compilation window over here, you click the add button, search and add content. I showed you how to add layers. Now I'm going to go down to the very bottom and I'm going to say add layer from file. In this case here, here's the school boundaries. That's that shape file I just downloaded from the city of Redlands. I'm going to select that as a zip, and I'm going to open that. So as I do that, you can see that those school boundaries come in. And again, just like all the other layers now, I go over to the ellipse, I can manage the labels, I can change the style. So let me do that really quickly again. And I'm just going to say based on school name. So again, you can now see different ways. And again, different fields. So for example, I could also do type. And again, I can label. So I can label the school name, or another one they have in here happens to be owner, city, so on and so forth, type. So again, whether it's a high school, a middle school, elementary school is different information. So again, don't worry so much about the design or the aesthetic at this point. It's really just getting the information in, and you can do it that way. So the last way I wanted to show how to add data was using something that we call places. So again, in the compilation window, again, I can go up here to the search and add content. Click here. Again, we've showed you how to add layers from the Esri cloud of data. We've shown how to add layers from a file. What I'm going to do here is search for places. So in this particular workflow, I'm going to click here. And what I can do is I can type in a category, for example, coffee. And I can type this. And what it's going to return, if I can do this slowly here, you can see hopefully inside the compilation window that blue kind of map pin showing up in different places. And it's giving you a preview of all the coffee shops that are actually over this area. So this one particular here is a Starbucks upper in the upper right-hand corner of my map. And I can choose by clicking this to add these maps or these locations of coffee shops. The other thing you could search for example, doesn't have to be a theme or category of locations. It could actually be an address. So for example, I'm going to type in the address for where our main headquarters, our campus is. And that happens to be 380 New York Street. I can do that here. So again, I can either type in a category, I can type in an address, I can type in a name, and it will return the location that I can then add to my map here by clicking the plus button. So once I do that, we get this layer called places. I'm going to just double click here. I'm going to call that Esri. That's the name of our headquarters. And the other thing, just to make it kind of stand out a little bit more on the map, I'm just going to make the symbol a little bit bigger so you guys can see it on the screen here. I'll make it a diamond. And again, don't worry so much about the aesthetics. Maybe that wasn't the most appropriate color. Let me pick a different color. Let's do red. Yeah, so there. Again, I'll turn off all the other layers. So that red diamond, that's the headquarters. And again, now I can choose to label that as well. So now I've got the address labeled. Make it a little bit smaller, make it metallic. And again, so we have that information now there. So those are all the different ways that you can add data to your map. So what I'm going to do now is, again, now that I've got the map more or less, it has all the layers that I want. I'm just simply going to click the synchronize or the download button. Again, that's the cloud with the arrow. And it's giving me the message that, again, once I close Illustrator, this compiled map is going to be gone, but all the artwork layers that I've downloaded will be saved as a part of that Illustrator document. So I'm going to click this. So this will take approximately, this map here is a little bit more complex. It has a few more data sets. So it'll take a few more minutes to download. I think it's about a minute or two to download. So as that's downloading, are there any outstanding questions?
Sure. There was something right now about, is the data that comes into Illustrator dynamically linked to the source file?
Okay. So the question is, yeah, once you download the data, is it linked? So if the source data changes, does the Illustrator artwork update? So the answer to that is no. What happens is really once you download the data into Illustrator, it's a snapshot of the data. But what you can do is you can re-add that layer and download again. And what will happen is that layer will show up as a second layer with the updated data sets, and then you can kind of resolve the differences. But again, in that workflow, that's most appropriate with the ArcGIS Online version, not the free complimentary version. Because again, once you close Illustrator, your compiled map goes away. So that ability to go back and resync and re-add new layers is really gone at that point. So that's how that happens. All right, so the map has been downloaded. And what I want to show you here now is the product that we've got. Let me zoom in a little bit here. So I've got a missing font here, so let me resolve that real quick. I'll do that after. So what I wanted to show here primarily is the layers. So again, let me collapse some of this. So you can see here, here's the, you can kind of see it here in the left. Here's the shaded relief on its own layer here. Underneath that is this vector map. And you can, again, you can see all the sublayers here defined as individual layers. So for example, all the transportation is on the transportation layer. And again, it's even subdivided by freeways and so on and so forth. So again, you have complete control and access to this information. So you can then go in and customize that information. So what I'm going to do in this case, for example, just a really quick customization, I'm going to take my hillshade layer, my image layer, I'm just going to drag that down over here. Actually, I want to go a little bit lower, and I'm going to move that below that. And again, if I wanted to add, for example, opacity to this. So I'm just going to do that so you can actually see the shaded relief between it. So again, you can now, once you have artwork layers, you can really just do whatever you would normally do inside of Illustrator itself. So the other thing to note here is we've got the Esri layer here. So that's that dot. You can see it there. I'm going to name this sublayer Esri, and I'll show you why I'm doing that here in a second. And what I'm going to do now is show you again the points of interest. Those are all in there. And what I'm going to do now is do what we call a symbol replacement. So in this particular example here, what I want to show is a symbol library document. So if you're not familiar with symbol libraries, let me just show you what those are real quickly. So in this particular document, I have a number of symbols set up. And what it can do is each symbol has a unique name. And if I hover over, for example, this is our company logo. We've got the university. So again, each symbol has a name. And so what we can do is, based on these names here in our symbol library, we can actually replace based on the name of the sublayer over here. So if there's a match between the layer name over here and our symbol name, then the symbols can get updated. So that's what I'm going to do and show you how to do that process right now. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up our settings. So it's under our settings dialog. I'm going to go into libraries, and you can point to a symbols library, which are points, a brush library, which are lines, and a swatches, which are fills. So I'm going to point to that symbol library. This is this on a Windows machine. This is the standard install location for all your symbol libraries. When you install ArcGIS Maps or Adobe Creative Cloud, we provide a couple samples as well under this folder called ArcGIS Maps. And that standard one is the one we were just looking at. So I'm going to point to that. I'm going to say OK. So now once that is set up, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open what we call our processes dialog. So from the compilation window, I'm going to open up processes. And again, this allows you to automatically replace the symbols that are available to us here. So what I can do here is I'm going to run this, say custom symbols, run that, and let it execute here. So I'm doing it kind of as a kind of a post process. You can actually execute this while on download. So in this particular example, I didn't do it immediately when I downloaded, but if this box was checked on, this would have happened automatically on download. So you can see it happen already. Let me zoom in here a little bit. You can see that some of the symbols have been replaced. Let me zoom in here. Let me turn off my labels, my text. So you can see now some of the generic symbols have been replaced by the ones that actually found a match. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. So in this particular example here, I went and rechanged the Esri name to Esri so I could get my Esri symbol in here. You can either change your layer names or you can change your symbol names. So they have to match. So it's really kind of, do I change the layer or do I change the symbol? So the recommendation in these other examples here, because we're using the vector street map, I know what the name of the layer is going to be. So our style matches that layer name. So we got these little symbols automatically. So that's kind of the workflow there. And that is the end of the demonstration. So what I want to do now is I'll go back to the PowerPoint. So what are you seeing?
Your talking point.
Oh, switch. Okay. So that was the demonstrations. How to install, how to draw a map extent, all the different ways that we can add data, and then how to bring that artwork into Illustrator. So I wanted to go through now a number of the questions that came up during the survey, and I'll talk to some of these really quickly. So again, most of the questions were about the general overview, so that's why I went through the demonstration, but then the next number of questions had to do with data. So, and I think I addressed most of these in the demonstration, but I'll just do a quick recap here. So you might see some of your questions here. I tried to take ones that were kind of representative of other ones. I may have modified them slightly, but more or less these are direct questions from people who responded to the survey. So how do I access third-party data to incorporate into my maps? So that was the part of the demonstration where I showed you could add CSV or shape files. And so again, a lot of different companies, governments have access to map data for free. So you can go out and find that. So that's like the demonstration where I showed going to the city of Redlands and downloading a shape file. And then from that, you can either add that directly in the map board to define the map extent and then automatically add it, or you can define your map extent first and then in the compilation window add that after. So that's how you would add third-party data there. You can also, again, I mentioned ArcGIS Online, our cloud of data. Again, there are 3 sources of data that's really in that. There's Esri data, there's business partner data, and there's customer data as well. So a lot of governments and cities, again, put data up there as well. So you can access it through files, or you can search ArcGIS Online and find third-party data that we host inside of that, inside of our cloud as well. Okay, next question. How do I load in-house project data generated by a GIS team? So yeah, if you are a designer or you work with an organization that has a mapping or a GIS team, there's a couple of ways of doing that. The actual easiest way of doing it, I think, is really when a GIS team is using the Esri technology, they can share maps and layers to our cloud, to ArcGIS Online. And each item has a unique URL. So let me show this and get here out of the PowerPoint. Let me go back in here. Let me go back here. I showed you a couple of these earlier. So you'll notice here, the world countries that we looked at earlier. To see this URL here, each item that a user shares to ArcGIS Online has a unique URL. So what you can do here, and here's the one for the hillshade, if a GIS team shares their data to ArcGIS Online, they can give you a URL. And what they can do is just copy and paste that. And I think the easiest way of doing it is if you come back in here to the compilation window, click the add button again, add layers, you'll notice that we were searching for information here. But there's also a second dialog down here. It says, or second radio button says, enter ArcGIS Online URL information. So what you can do is just paste this here, hit enter, and again, you'll get that map or that layer. So you can add it that way. There is another way of doing it. If you want to do it more systematically, where you have a numerous set of layers, you can actually set up a tagging structure in the item. The GIS team, the mapping team can do that. And I can share the information on how to do that if you want to do it for a large number of maps or a large number of layers. But if you're doing individual layers, this is probably the easiest way to find layers that the GIS or the mapping team has created and shared with ArcGIS Online. All right. Okay. Can we control the fonts and other stylings on the map before sync? So really that question there is, what kind of design work can we do in the map before it gets downloaded? And I mentioned this a couple times, and the reason I mentioned that was really to answer this question, right? Yes, you can do some styling inside of the extension, but really that's what Illustrator and Photoshop are really their strengths are. So there are certain fonts and there's certain control that you can have, but the process of actually adding the content is really more of what I would call a data visualization exercise. Putting things in categories, getting the information into layers in Illustrator. So not so much about changing the fonts or the styling, it's really just putting things in groupings and categories that allow you to easily manipulate that in Illustrator after the fact. So that at that point, once you get a font, for example, you can select all your labels and then do a find and replace on the fonts very quickly and very easily in Illustrator. So that process, the more specific styling is best done in Illustrator. The data visualization, the categorization, the adding of information is best done in the extension. So one of the questions, sorry, I jumped ahead. I didn't realize. So I'd like to see more vector-based maps. So again, I showed there were two ones that we have available today. There's Natural Earth, which again are better for kind of country level detail or world level detail. And then there's the vector street map. And again, that's a really good data set, a very good base map. That's all vector data. And that's global and that's very highly detailed. So it will go down to street level detail. So we are working and plan to have in the next couple of releases support for more vector-based maps, but that's a work in progress. Related to that is the second question here, or the next question here is I want to create maps with higher level of detail similar to OpenStreetMap. So if you're not familiar with OpenStreetMap, it's a public data set that has a high level of detail data set that's freely available, and it's all vector format. So we don't have access to that now, but we are actually working on that. And there's a couple layers that we'll be adding in the next couple months that you'll be able to add in, for example, building footprints and roads from OpenStreetMap. So that's again a work in progress that we're working on that we hope to have released sometime in the future. So the next set of questions had to do with install performance and the experience of the application. So someone wrote in, it's powerful, it's useful, but it can be a little intimidating for new users. So yeah, we understand that. So we're constantly taking feedback from users. So if you guys have specific suggestions or ideas, we'd love to hear that from you guys. We are working currently on our next release that's due out in the next couple months. And we have made some modifications to simplify the user experience and make that more accessible. So we're always looking for improvements and we appreciate the feedback. So if you guys have ideas or suggestions, please let us know. There was a comment about the more stability, and it seems to run specifically slow on a PC. This was actually funny. I did my demonstration on a PC. It wasn't really to address this question, but it happened to be. I looked at it after. It happened to be that it was kind of addressed the same question. So if you're seeing performance issues, we'd like to talk to you specifically. It doesn't seem to be a specific operating system, whether Mac or PC. There could be some other issues going on here. So if this is what you're seeing, it seems to be particularly slow. Again, we'd like to work with you if you're interested, and we'd like to see what's going on. So reach out to us. Again, there'll be an email at the end of the presentation, because again, the application is relatively new. We've only been out for a little over a year and a half. So again, we appreciate having the opportunity to work with customers directly and troubleshoot with them and make the application better. So I'm having problems installing and registering the extension. So again, I mentioned this earlier. If you use an Adobe Enterprise or Team account, that might be the issue. You might see what Adobe presents back as a 602 error, or it might not even show up in the Windows extensions list. So that could be the issue. Again, reach out to us. We'll help you troubleshoot what's going on there. We have had people who've commented that when they sign up for the complimentary access code, they don't get it. typically that's ends up being, you know, it got put in their spam folder or something like that. But if you do run into that, sometimes it takes a little bit of time as well. It can take up to, I've had one customer say, I think it took up to 20 minutes to a half hour for them to get the email. So if you don't get it within, you know, maybe an hour or two, again, just reach out to us and we can see what's going on. But check your spam folder on your email, make sure it didn't go there first, because that's typically what happens. So the next question is regarding integration with other parts of the Esri ArcGIS platform. So there was a question about my corporation is moving from ArcGIS Online, which is what I was showing here, where you have all the cloud hosted data, to an on-premise implementation, which Esri happens to call ArcGIS Enterprise or Portal. Will this be supported? So currently, the only thing that we support today is ArcGIS Online, but we are actively working on supporting on-premise Portal Enterprise in a future release. So that's a work in progress. We don't have that today. Are there plans to build Adobe tools into the Esri platform, like an Adobe plugin for ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro? The answer to that is no. It's really the other way around, like I was showing today, where we bring mapping data into Adobe. And so specifically, what we're also working on is, if you are using our ArcGIS Pro, our desktop application, we are actively working on a project as well to integrate workflows where you can consume map exports from ArcGIS Pro into this extension, so you get a similar experience where you get these clean, nice, organized layers like you were seeing in the demonstration. So that's a work in progress. The plan specifically for the integration with our desktop product, ArcGIS Pro, is around June, July timeframe. So if you're an Esri customer and you're attending our conference, our user conference in San Diego, we expect to have it available around that time or a little bit after, so sometime this summer. Okay. Next Q&A, layers, styles, and 3D. Is there a way to apply styles in a one single click? So yes, there is. Again, that was the demonstration with the symbol replacement. So again, the idea is that you have a symbol library, a brushes library, or a strokes library set up with a name, and the name matches the layer or the sublayer in the document. Then you can run that process. And this is documented in our help system as well, which I'll share the link to after that as well. There was a comment or question on continuous lines for roads and rivers as opposed to short segments. So when those, specifically with the vector street map data, it's very detailed, and some other data sets are quite detailed. And so sometimes when they come in, if that feature is very long, like roads or rivers, yeah, they're sometimes broken up. My recommendation at this point is that's probably easier done in Illustrator, where you can join those segments together. And that's something we're looking at to improve with different data sets. But it really is a function of who is providing that data to us versus the data itself. But that is something that's been coming up, and again, that's something that we'll look into for the future as well. Talked about the fonts already. First, skip over that. How do you create 3D visualizations with this tool and or Adobe or Esri products? So this tool specifically, ArcGIS Maps for Adobe Creative Cloud, doesn't have a 3D component, and there are no plans for a 3D component. Adobe and Esri also have very specific focused tools and workflows for 3D. So the idea is to use those other focus tools to address 3D concerns. Specifically with using this with 3D, the idea is specifically if you're using ArcGIS Pro and you do something in 3D and you export the map, we will see if our first release will be able to honor any of the 3D visualizations we do in the Esri products today. But if you're doing something, for example, in City Engine or something in, like, for Adobe Dimensions, use those tools to do that, or whatever the process you have specifically in Illustrator or Photoshop for doing 3D. But this extension itself doesn't really handle 3D specifically. So there were a number of miscellaneous questions. Are there detailed instructions how to use the extension? Yes, this webcast. So that was part of this. We saw that there were a number of questions about just general use, how to use the extension. But we also have a YouTube channel. We have some good documentation. And again, I'll share all those links out after this presentation as well. Can you use the extension in Photoshop? And the answer is yes. I didn't demonstrate it here. The workflows are exactly the same. How you define a map extent, how you define adding layers is exactly the same. The only difference between Illustrator workflow and the Photoshop workflow is in Illustrator, if the source document is vectors, they will come in as vector data, right? So in the example, I had a shaded relief layer, which was an image layer. Then I added the street map, and then I added the CSV file. All that was vector data except for the hill shade. So that came into Illustrator as vector layers when the source was vector, and then if the source was our image layer or raster layer, it came into Illustrator as raster. In Photoshop, even if the source is vector, it will come in as raster. So that's really the biggest workflow difference, or the biggest difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. Is in Illustrator, you'll get raster and vector. In Photoshop, you'll only get raster. Is there a student option for the license? Not specifically, but again, we highlighted today, everything that I showed you today was available in the complimentary access. Again, just to highlight how you do that, you just sign up, give us an email address, and we'll send you an activation code. With that activation code, it doesn't time out, and you can use everything that I demonstrated today as a student. How do I credit Esri and ArcGIS Maps when I'm making a map? So the biggest thing you have to do, and again, there's some documentation on this, which I'll share out as well, is really the source provider of the data. So when you download the data, you'll probably notice that there's a source credit at the bottom. So for example, it'll say Esri or USGS or City of Redlands or something to that effect. You need to keep the credit. It doesn't have to be in that specific location on the map. For example, if you're doing a web page or you're doing a print article, it doesn't even have to be on the map. But as long as it's credited somewhere, that's the requirement. If you want to credit us as the application, we put our logo in there, that's great. But it's really, you just need to source the source contributor itself, and we provide you that text or who the source contributor is based on the layer that you added. So that's really the only requirement. And again, I can share that information with you guys after this as well. So what are the features planned for the next release, and when will that be available? So I mentioned a couple things earlier, and there's a slide about that. So we have a data release planned in the next couple weeks, and we have an update planned for the summer. So those are the next features, and I'll go through some of the features that will be available in a minute. Is there a way to merge multiple maps into one? So I believe what this question was asking is, if I download a map over the same geographic extent, can I add additional layers to that? If that's what the question was meant to ask, you can only really do that with the ArcGIS Online version when you sign in with that, because essentially, again, once you close Illustrator, the compiled map has gone away, so you can't re-add layers over and over again. Now, if the question was about how do I take maps with different map extents, different geographic extents, there is no way of doing that with the extension today. So conclusion, roadmap. So again, I mentioned we are working on a couple of releases. One is a data release. Again, that'll be hopefully available in the next couple of weeks. And then we have a software release planned for the summer. So in that, I mentioned earlier about the improved experience. So hopefully we're making it a little bit easier. So we're changing how you create the map extent or the map boards. So it's kind of almost like a browser experience now where the map boards are tabbed. So we think that's a little bit more intuitive. And we've improved the icons and the layout of the buttons as well. So we're hopefully making some improvements regarding that to make it easier. There's some data updates. I mentioned that the vector street map, that's getting updated, natural earth maps. We're adding new layers. So instead of actually using the whole map as a single object, you can actually get access to the natural earth layers as individual layers. We're going to be providing access to some of the layers that are available from the USGS. So one that is probably of interest is contours or elevation lines. So they'll be available through the extension as well. Again, I mentioned OpenStreetMap. That's an ongoing project. So there'll be a few layers that will be available soon. Specifically, I believe the roads, buildings, and points of interest. But we expect to continue to add support for more OpenStreetMap layers in the next release and the upcoming releases. We're also adding the ability to add demographic data. So for example, if you have an existing data set, a point layer, a CSV or something like that, or maybe you found something in ArcGIS Online that you wanted to use, but you wanted to add demographic data, for example, spending patterns or age distribution or something like that, you can actually add those sets of attributes to that data as well. We're working on a legend builder. So a way of actually visually describing what symbol on the map is what it's representing in terms of whether it's a hospital, whether it's a police station, whatever. So we'll having a tool that will automate that process for you. The ability to control which layers get downloaded and synced. So right now, by default, they always come down unless you turn off the visibility. So we're adding the ability to make that an optional part. I showed earlier the ability to add places. So I typed in coffee or I typed in an address. Currently, that's limited to returning the maximum of 50 places. That limitation will be removed in the upcoming release. And then we have some new visualization options coming as well, travel times and geographic offsets or buffers. So those are some of the features that will be showing up in the next couple of releases. So here's the last slide, I believe. So this is the resources. So again, any of the outstanding issues you have with install or comments or questions or feedback, the Maps for Adobe email alias, we're pretty responsive to that. So if you have any questions, just reach out to us there. We usually get back within a day, and we try to be pretty responsive to that. So again, if you're having install issues or anything else, just let us know. Or again, for anyone who's having performance issues, we'd be interested in seeing what's going on and working with you. If you don't mind investing a little bit of time with us, we'd really appreciate that. We have some social media activity, so you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram there. Again, I showed some of our user documentation. It's pretty extensive. You can find the link to that as well. Most, if not every topic, is discussed in a lot of detail, actually. So you can find that there. Then we also have a number of demos and tutorials up on YouTube. Those are pretty good. Some of them might be a little bit dated, but the general workflow is pretty much the same. So you can find that, and that's where this video is going to get posted as well as up to YouTube. So you can go there and browse our demos and tutorials there. And we also have a user community. So if you want to ask questions to us, again, we monitor that pretty regularly, but then there's also people, users on that as well that can answer questions, and other people from Esri that will jump on and answer questions when appropriate. So that's the different ways that you can reach out to us. And that is all the questions or all the slides we had. And so we can take time now. We've got some more time left over. If there's any outstanding questions, we can answer those. I'm getting a thumbs up from the team here that I think we've answered all the questions. I will hang on for another 5 minutes or so if you guys want to stick around and think about stuff and ask questions. But otherwise, just thank you guys for attending. And like I said, we'll send out an email once this recording is up on YouTube, and we'll send out some of the other answers to some of those other questions that we had in the survey. And again, thank you guys for spending your Friday with us, and I hope you learned something. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.